So, um, imagine waking up in January of 2020 and someone sits you down to tell you the future.
Oh, man. You'd think they were crazy.
Right. They tell you that in the next few years, the global economy is just going to fall completely through the floor. A mob is going to storm the United States Capitol. A sitting president is going to drop out just months before an election. And you personally are going to struggle to buy baby formula or toilet paper at your local grocery store.
Yeah, I mean, you'd probably think they were pitching you like a dystopian movie script or something.
Exactly. But that is exactly the historical whiplash we are diving into today. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking a really comprehensive look at the 2020s in the United States so far.
Yeah, basically starting from January 2020 right up to today, March 2026.
Yeah. We've got this massive chronological Wikipedia article mapping out the dizzying events of this half-decade. And our mission for you, the listener, is to kind of help you process this absolute fire hose of recent history. We're going to connect the dots between the public health crises, the economic shocks, and these profound political pendulum swings, just to make sense of exactly how we got here.
And look, before we jump into the timeline, we really have to acknowledge the elephant in the room here. The source material we are unpacking today is, well, it's intensely polarized.
Oh, incredibly polarized.
Yeah, it covers massive political divides spanning deeply held viewpoints from both the left-wing and the right-wing perspectives.
All right.
So we need to make it absolutely clear to you, we are not taking a side.
Right, absolutely not.
We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints or the actions or the policies we're about to discuss. Our singular goal today is just to impartially map the terrain of the original source material.
Yeah, we're basically just your tour guides through the chaos. So, okay, let's unpack this. We have to begin where the disruption of the decade truly started, right? The COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, for sure. The primary domino.
Exactly. Because to really understand the 2020s, we can't just look at it as a health event. We have to look at it as the thing that knocked over the global economy and completely broke our supply chains.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the initial domestic response really sets the stage for everything that follows. I mean, when you look at the source data from early 2020, the U.S. response was remarkably slow.
Specifically with the testing, right?
Right, of testing infrastructure. By March 10th of 2020, fewer than 10,000 people in the entire country had been tested. And even stretching into late March, the testing rate was only about 1 in every 320 inhabitants.
Wait, how is that mathematically possible? I mean, for a country with the resources of the United States, were the tests just, not invented yet?
Well, no, they existed globally. The World Health Organization actually had developed functional tests, but the CDC opted not to use them.
Wait, really? Why?
Yeah, they chose instead to produce their own domestic version. The sources note it was a mix of, institutional pride and rigid internal protocols. But the major problem was the initial batch of CDC tests had manufacturing defects.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they simply didn't work. And you combine that faulty rollout with incredibly strict federal regulations that prevented commercial labs from stepping in.
So they couldn't even help?
Nope. The regulations severely restricted testing capacity. So the country was essentially flying blind, which completely obscured how fast the virus was actually spreading.
So instead of taking a working global test, we insisted on building our own. It broke, and the bureaucratic red tape kept anyone else from fixing the problem. That is terrifying.
It really is.
And while the healthcare system was flying blind, the economic domino fell hard and fast. In the last week of February 2020, the Dow plunged over 3,000 points.
Yeah, massive drop.
And by late March, the floor just fell out completely, bottoming at 18,592.
And that market crash wasn't just fear of the virus itself, It was investors suddenly realizing how interconnected and fragile global manufacturing truly was.
Because if a factory in Asia shuts down...
Exactly. Assembly lines in the Midwest halt.
It's like the pandemic threw a wrench into the world's engine, and 2 years later, you find out the baby formula belt snapped.
That is a perfect analogy,
Ah.
because this supply chain crisis didn't just end in 2020.
No, I remember walking into grocery stores in 2022 and seeing entire aisles completely bare. The baby formula shortage was insane.
Right, and the mechanics of that shortage perfectly illustrate the systemic fragility we're talking about. The source points out that by May 2022, nationwide out-of-stock rates for infant formula hit 43%.
43%?
Yeah. To put that in perspective, a normal out-of-stock rate is maybe 2 to 10%.
How does almost half the country's baby formula just vanish?
It was a perfect storm, basically.
Okay.
Compounding failures. You already had the baseline global shipping crisis started by the pandemic, right? shipping containers in the wrong ports, labor shortages.
Right.
But then, a major domestic formula plant was shut down due to contamination concerns, which triggered a massive product recall.
Oh, man.
And because the U.S. market is highly concentrated among just a few manufacturers and strict FDA import rules make it incredibly difficult to bring in formula from Europe, that single factory closure broke the entire system.
Which brings it right to the listener's kitchen table. I mean, what began as this abstract, macro-level global health crisis transformed into a desperate reality for families staring at bare shelves in Delaware, Kansas, Tennessee.
The abstract became frighteningly local.
Totally.
But, physical supply chains weren't the only things breaking under the pressure. The pandemic was this massive societal pressure cooker. You had a population locked inside, economically anxious, glued to their screens.
Oh, yeah.
And that immense stress fundamentally fractured the nation's civic and institutional foundations.
Which acts as the flashpoint for the massive social upheaval we saw. Like in May 2020, following the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in Minneapolis, protests erupted and just spread globally.
The sheer scale of the mobilization was staggering.
It really was. The article notes that over 74,000 National Guard personnel were activated to handle the unrest. And by early June, there were at least 11,000 arrests.
The system was being stress-tested in real time. And that level of civic friction bled directly into the institutional friction following the 2020 presidential election.
Right.
We saw an aggressive, organized effort by Donald Trump and his allies to overturn the election results.
Nice.
The sources repeatedly described this campaign as the, quote, big lie.
And the mechanism of that effort wasn't just rhetoric. It was aimed directly at the constitutional process of certifying the vote, culminating in the January 6th Capitol attack.
Yeah, a really dark day.
Roughly 2,000 to 2,500 rioters physically breached the Capitol building. 138 police officers were injured, and tragically, 4 officers who responded that day later died by suicide.
It is a profound moment of institutional vulnerability. And that friction didn't just stop at the Capitol doors. It continued into the judicial and legislative branches over the next few years.
Like the Supreme Court.
Exactly. Consider the landmark Dobbs decision in June 2022.
Voting 6-3 to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Yes, and the mechanism of that decision is vital to understand. By declaring that the Constitution does not grant a right to abortion, the court didn't outlaw it federally. They rewrote a half-century of legal precedent to return that authority entirely to individual states.
Right, so structurally, it meant your medical rights could change overnight just by driving across a state line, a massive decentralization of rights.
Exactly, and while the courts are shifting power to the states, Congress itself essentially grinds to a halt. Look at 2023.
Oh, the Speaker of the House vote.
Yeah, the election of Kevin McCarthy took a historic 15 rounds of voting.
15 rounds.
The ruling party was so internally divided they couldn't even agree on who gets to hold the gavel.
So what does this all mean for the average person? I mean, with institutions from the police to the Supreme Court to the Capitol itself under fire, how does a society actually function day to day when the rule book is being rewritten in real time?
Well, it shows how deeply polarized the nation had become. But there is a fascinating contradiction to note here.
What's that?
The system was pushed to its absolute constitutional brink, right? The Capitol breached, the Speaker's gavel held hostage, monumental judicial precedents reversed. But the levers of government ultimately kept moving.
That's true.
The electoral vote was certified, the courts continued to issue rulings, the machinery didn't completely shatter, but it limped forward with historically deep divides and a massive loss of public trust.
And it was in response to those deep societal fractures that the electorate swung the pendulum in the 2020 election. They elected Joe Biden, making him the oldest president in history at the time, seemingly looking for stability, legislative repair.
But the reality of his term proved to be vastly more complicated. You can't just hit reset on a highly fractured environment.
No, you really can't.
Mechanically, the Biden administration brought sweeping legislative ambitions to try and patch the country back together.
And on paper, his legislative wins were massive. I mean, you had the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, the $1 trillion Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act.
Right, the macroeconomic data looked historically strong. He oversaw the strongest economic recovery of any G7 nation, hitting record low unemployment and creating over 16 million jobs.
But those top-line numbers were constantly colliding with the lived reality of the voter. I mean, his term was hampered by highly visible crises.
Like the chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal.
Exactly. And the internal party gridlock where his Build Back Better plan was effectively killed by Senator Joe Manchin. And then, of course, the soaring inflation.
Yeah, the inflation, that's where the macro really meets the micro.
National gas prices hit an all-time high of $5.02 a gallon in June 2022. It sounds like Biden was trying to fully renovate a house while the kitchen was actively on fire.
What's fascinating here is that exact disconnect. You have this massive legislative and job creation milestone, yet median wages stagnated. Wealth inequality actually grew for the top 0.1%.
So the spreadsheet says the economy is booming, but the wallet says something entirely different.
Exactly. Everyday inflation left voters feeling incredibly economically insecure. And it was compounded by deeply divisive policies, like the $300 billion student loan forgiveness plan.
Right, the 10K to 20K per borrower.
Yeah. And ultimately, mounting concerns over Biden's age and mental fitness led him to withdraw from the 2024 race. His preferred successor, Kamala Harris, lost the election, and he ended his term with sweeping pardons for his family and critics.
Which brings us to the most unprecedented pendulum swing yet, Trump 2.0. Sitting here in early 2026, it's wild. Donald Trump winning the 2024 election made him the second U.S. president to serve non-consecutive terms.
And the path he took back to the White House was frankly shocking, including surviving an assassination attempt at a 2024 rally in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, where he sustained that right ear injury and 2 people died, including the shooter.
Right. And he was inaugurated as the 47th president at age 78. So he's now the oldest person to become president, and the first with a felony conviction.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The sheer velocity of his second term in 2025.
Velocity is definitely the key word. Mechanically, the Trump administration recognized that relying on Congress is slow. So they executed a rapid-fire expansion of executive power.
How rapid are we talking?
During 2025 alone, he signed 225 executive orders.
Wow.
Yeah, that is the most in a single year since FDR. He established the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, briefly overseen by Elon Musk.
Right, to bypass traditional civil service protection.
Exactly. Mass deportations. Aggressive tariff increases that actually caused the Dow to fall 900 points in April 2025.
And we need to connect that to you, the listener, for a second. Tariffs aren't just like a tax on another country. Mechanically, they are a tax paid by the domestic importer, which almost always means the cost of your electronics, your cars, and your groceries goes up.
It's an immediate kitchen table impact. And his foreign policy utilized that same bypass of bureaucracy.
Right, moving incredibly fast.
Geopolitical whiplash, really. By October 2025, he signed a Gaza ceasefire. He withdrew from the WHO and the Paris Accords again.
Authorized lethal strikes on Caribbean drug traffickers.
Ordered an operation to capture Venezuela's Maduro. And just recently, in February 2026, launched a major attack on Iran alongside Israel, targeting the supreme leader.
It's just so much, so fast. But how does an administration that actively bypasses traditional bureaucracy and constantly clashes with the courts impact the future blueprint of American governance? Because judges were repeatedly finding his actions illegal, and the administration was accused of defying court oversight.
This raises an important question. The defining characteristic of Trump's second term, as noted by the sources, is this relentless expansion of presidential power and friction with the courts.
Right.
And if we look at this purely structurally, whether you agree with the policies or not, the executive branch in 2025 and 2026 is fundamentally challenging the traditional boundaries of the checks and balances system.
So bringing this all back to you, the listener. Sitting here in March 2026, this compressed timeline proves that history isn't just something safely contained in a textbook.
Not at all.
From the price of gas to the availability of baby formula, from supply chain crashes to shifting interpretations of constitutional rights, the ping-ponging political pendulum directly impacts your daily life.
It really does. And as we process all this systemic fragility, there is one final stark event from the source material that we haven't touched on yet.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it serves as a powerful anchor. In March 2024, the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore collapsed.
Oh, wow, yes. It was struck by that massive container ship that lost power, right?
Yes, 6 people were tragically killed, and structurally, it blocked the port for 11 weeks. It will cost up to $5.2 billion to replace by 2030.
It's just wild to think about. One mechanical failure on one ship paralyzed a massive economic artery.
Exactly. I want to leave everyone with a final thought to mull over. In a decade obsessed with ideological battles and who sits in the Oval Office, the bridge collapse is a glaring metaphor.
Right.
If a single mechanical failure can sever a massive economic artery, how resilient is the actual physical foundation holding up the country? Are we spending too much time arguing over who holds the gavel and not enough time checking the concrete?
Wow. That is definitely something to think about the next time you drive over a bridge or, walk into a grocery store. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.